If you really want to have a career in the public space, you kind of have to have a degree. I talked to a few friends and they said, well, if you believe you can do it better, why don't you start your own business? A fundamental thing we just don't speak about it often enough is that the one thing you can never get back is time. Don't wait until you feel that you're ready for it. Start today.
We were in negotiations.
Investing in real estate, they're winning, they're making money.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Real Estate Educators Podcast, where we provide the education you can build on. I am your host, Kevin Amolsch. I'm having so much fun with this podcast because we're helping real estate investors and real estate educators. If you're out there building a real estate portfolio, you're buying properties, you're flipping them, you're renting them out, or if you're out there educating real estate investors, this is the podcast for you. I have a super special guest with me today. I'm going to dig in a lot to his podcast because he's got a very successful one and also a pretty prolific real estate investor. Has been doing it for a long time. So, Dr. Axel Meierhoefer, did I get that right?
That was perfect. Better than last time even.
Yeah. I had to practice a little bit before I pushed record here. So ex-military, you were in the Air Force and you turned real estate investor. So I know you've been doing this for a while, 15 years, but you started the most recent venture in 2020. So I'm excited to hear more about that right during COVID. I started this company in 2008. So that was during an interesting time as well. Seems like there's good, successful companies come out of weird economic situations. So you were in COVID, during COVID. And now the name of the company or what you're working on now is Ideal Wealth Grower. So I want to learn more about that. It sounds like it might be a book and it's some coaching because you're helping yourself become wealthy, leveraging 20% of your money, and you're helping your students or people in your community do that as well. So welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for having me.
Well, let's dig in then. So Air Force, huh?
Yes.
Why the Air Force?
Well, I could go the cheeky way and say, the gentlemen fly in the Air Force and then go to Top Gun and all that kind of stuff. But no, the thing is, I wanted to actually originally influenced by my uncle, who was an executive at Lufthansa. And he had this kind of, air and flair of confidence and international, like he did all kinds of stuff. He had amazing stories. He was smoking a pipe, which was normal at the time when I was little, right? So whenever he left from a visit to the family, the house smelled like his pipe for a little while. My mom hated it, but because normally smoking wasn't allowed, but he was somehow. So I wanted to actually fly for Lufthansa. And I just was unfortunate to graduate from German high school, which is basically kind of like an associate's degree program, right in the middle of the 80s, basically economic crisis, and they just didn't hire. And when you come out of school, and at the time, in my generation at least, it wasn't that common that everybody tried to go to university. It was much more common to try and get a normal quote unquote job. So I wanted to go to the Lufthansa. I applied, I did the testing. They said, you did great. You are totally qualified. Sad story, we can't hire anybody. And I said, well, how long is this going to take? And they said, we're not allowed to give anything. It could be 6 months, could be 2 years, right? And so 6 months, I would have probably said, okay, I wait. But since they were so vague, for number one, I was pretty devastated. Number two was, what alternatives do I have? And I initially thought, well, is there any chance to get hired by another airline? Because I knew already that airline flying and stuff is all English. Everybody speaks the same language, so that should be possible. But they were all basically in the same boat. And I thought I had to give up that dream and my mom was working for the Navy as a secretary. She told her boss, who was an admiral, about my kind of depression, post high school depression. And he said, why isn't he flying for us? And, like she comes home totally excited and says, hey, my boss said you should apply to the Navy. They fly too. So I actually tried this. I went to the Navy recruiting center and said, hey, this admiral that my mom works for said I should fly for you. He said, well, that's not how it works. You have to, go through an application and stuff. I said, no, I didn't mean it that way, but is it true? Can I fly for you? And the guy says, yeah, generally it's true. But first, our guys in the Navy always have to learn how to drive a boat before they can fly planes. I said, no, you misunderstand. I want to fly. And we had a little bit back and forth, and I end the story on that note. He said, if you're so insisting on flying, why the heck don't you go to the Air Force?
Makes sense.
So I went there, I told them that I already passed the test for Lufthansa. They said, that doesn't count, you have to pass our test. And I did, obviously.
And then you were in. So how long did you serve?
22 years.
Wow, long time. Okay, so you enjoyed it, and then you got out, and then real estate.
Well, kind of. The real estate was more triggered by initially getting out and being immediately hired into a software company, because I was doing a lot of instructing and test flying and so forth. So learning and teaching was something that I always enjoyed. And that software company was looking for somebody to run their customer service and training department. So they recruited me, and I was told at the time, not so sure, I think it's probably true still now, is that if you really want to have a career in the public space, you kind of have to have a degree. And so I started going to graduate school while I was basically working for this company. And it was this thing, you know, from 9 to about 5:30, I saw how leadership works. And then between about 7:30 to 10 at night, I went to the university, which was around the corner from where I worked, and I heard how it's supposed to be. And it couldn't have been further from each other.
I think that's interesting, because I did the same thing. So you worked hard.
Yes.
You worked all day and then went to school at night.
Yes.
It's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. And so ultimately, 4 years later in this job, I realized, okay, I'm literally graduating, and admittedly, I went way further than I wanted to, but I graduated ultimately with a PhD in leadership and change. And I was involved practicing something that was literally the opposite. And I talked to a few friends, and they said, well, if you believed you can do it better, why don't you start your own business? Which is what I did, but it also meant to me, okay, well, if I have my own business, there's no 401k, there's no government pension, no nothing like that. What do I do? And that's how I basically found found real estate as, you know, the thing that I wanted to get into, because I was always fascinated, didn't study it until then, and really start, you know, not quite cassette tapes, but DVDs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, back in the day.
Books. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So I studied on cassette tape, so it's interesting you said that. But you know, it's a common question or a common conversation that we have about school and the relevance of school to real world and actually making money. And I mean, obviously, it's a controversial topic. Some people strongly believe that you need to go to college, you need to get your PhD, as you did. And then some people like Robert Kiyosaki, someone who a lot of people respect, say you don't need to do that. In fact, that might even hurt you if you're trying to be an entrepreneur and move on. So just out of curiosity, where on that scale do you fall? You obviously put a lot of time and effort into school. Was it worth it?
I would say yes, but with a little bit of a caveat to it. What nobody taught me in those kind of uncertain terms was that the question, should I or shouldn't I, should really mainly be focused on in which industry is it unequivocally necessary. Instead of going and saying, okay, it is kind of basically a requirement to have a career, which is kind of how it came across to me, right? Like if you don't at least have a bachelor's or better, even a master's degree, it's hard to have a career. So why do I say, yes, in hindsight, it was worth it, is out of a kind of fluke situation. If you want to hear the story, I'm happy to tell it. My consulting work, which I started, as I mentioned, by forming my own business, in a crazy quick way, almost immediately turned into consulting in the life science industry, which, you know, couldn't be further from like flying jets or helping a company do software. So it was really something very new. It was almost like learning a third language between German and English. And there you deal a lot with scientists. And I think other industries have a similar thing where you kind of have to have the check marks, right? So when you're applying to consult with a pharmaceutical company who has some kind of issue and they compare people that apply, consultants that apply to help them, and you are the one who has a doctorate. It's not immediately to say, okay, let me find out, is it biology, chemistry, physics, biochemistry, what is it? It's more, this is a check mark. This is a guy who has shown that he or she can work through the rigor of that. And therefore, which is why I'm saying this is the important part, therefore, the assumption is that this person can also communicate with all our scientists who are also PhD/doctorate people, right? So on the flip side, when we go to real estate, would I recommend for anybody who is fascinated by real estate, whether it's flipping, investing, contracting, handyman kind of work, and then all the trades, electrician, carpentry, and so forth, to get any kind of degree? I would say no. Because in those trades, quote unquote, I believe the quality of work that you can show and have quickly build a community of fans is way more important for becoming successful, having a successful business, being able to invest and get wealthy than any degree.
I agree. And like you will learn a lot more in the field, like actually going through a transaction than you can in a classroom.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, one thing, and I think you and I are both from our previous conversations very aligned with that, and it's a fundamental thing, we just don't speak about it often enough, is that the one thing you can never get back is time. Right? And especially now, if you imagine, like my journey was overall 7 years, from getting out of the Air Force to having my own business and getting the degrees and stuff like that. Just imagine where we probably are if anybody listening to us is taking today, 2025, and say, where will technology, opportunity, jobs, taxes, business, all this kind of stuff that is kind of involving our life be in 7 years from now, or even in 5 years from now? So that is not just true today, that has always been true. That's part of why I'm saying this. Now, for me to be successful in the life science industry, I believe strongly that a lot of the really cool opportunities I got and made really good money that then ultimately allowed me to invest in real estate wouldn't have happened without the PhD. But if I had straight out, no military, no nothing, wanted to go into real estate, it would have been 7 years that I would probably never have made up between me having a degree and the person having practice for 7 years.
Right. That's, I 100% agree with you. Now I know you got into real estate because of what you call time freedom. I think that's how you describe it. I interpret that to mean, Axel, that it's just, you could do what you want when you want. You have enough money to be able to make that type of decision. I'm just curious, because now that time's come up a couple of times. Have you read the book Buy Back Your Time? Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it. I've seen this kind of 15-minute Blinkist summary. I haven't read the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah, for the listener, my goodness, this is one of the best books I've read in recent years. So it's Buy Back Your Time. I don't know the name of the author right now. I probably should have looked that up before I said that. But Buy Back Your Time. Google that. It's fantastic. And actually, I would highly recommend that one. All right, let's get back into real estate here. So now you're successful as an investor. You've been doing it for 15 years. So tell us what you're working on.
Well, what I'm working on, one thing is an expansion to Europe. So the Idea Wealth Grower business has always been very focused on the American or United States and Canadian market, mainly for investing in what I call out-of-state turnkey investments, because that's how it started. That software company that recruited me out of the Air Force was in Santa Barbara, California. And it's, I could say Seattle, I could say San Diego, I could say New York or Boston. Those are places where it's very hard for normal people to start an investing career. So what I basically, when I made that decision, I wanted to get into it, was looking for is where can I find high performing assets? And those weren't up and down the coast, 50 miles, within 50 miles of the beach. And on the other hand, everybody said, well, how are you going to do this? And this was before David Green basically wrote that book for, it's the guy that does the Bigger Pockets podcast about building your team. I read it after I had already designed or discovered my approach, which is basically using turnkey providers as kind of like your partners for investing. we can dive into that a little bit. But the point was, okay, I did it myself first. My whole portfolio is basically with turnkey providers in well-performing geographic locations. And then when I, as a blabbermouth, as people can probably tell listening to us, asked me, what am I up to? And I said, well, I'm getting after this other house there in Idaho, or I'm looking to work with a new location in the Cincinnati-Dayton area in Ohio. They got curious, and ultimately, when a couple of months later I told them, okay, I got this one, now I'm going after the next one, they started asking, can I do this too? This is how Idea Wealth Grower basically got started. And yeah, that was basically the main thing about how to get into this whole idea of time freedom point, because the idea is to focus on residential real estate that is positive cash flow from day one. And then it's a matter of, if you say, Kevin, I need $5,000 a month to have a nice, comfortable life, I can go on vacations, I can take care of my wife and my kids and so forth. I'm just making up that number. It could be any number. Then it's a matter of figuring out, okay, to get to that number on a monthly basis regularly, every month, how many properties do we need? Right. And that's how the whole time freedom. And I always say there are two levels. Time freedom is for those 5,000. And then when you step by step get all the mortgages paid off over time, then you get to what's called bullshit money in my book. Right. when you can cover everything and then still have some left over.
That's actually the bullshit money. I've heard it called different things that are not as clean as that, but all right. So now you're working towards that. So turnkey properties, I've got some experience with those as well. There's some risks involved with working with turnkey providers. So if we were gonna take your advice and try to build a portfolio of well-located real estate using turnkey providers, what are some of the things we should look out for? Like, how do we stay safe here?
Well, the first thing is obviously due diligence. I mean, just as an umbrella term. So all the things that would apply, whether the property is like next door to you, half an hour driving distance, or 1,000 miles away. It's really a matter of, and this is part of our mentoring program, to say and to teach people, since you mentioned teaching and educating, teach people of how do I go about finding properties, for example, that meet that cash flow positive from day one, and why do they meet it? One of the things, for example, that I find very important in that context is to never buy anything without an inspection report, an agreement on what are the, or how are the results of the inspection report mitigated. And there is, by the way, for the audience, and you have probably mentioned this before, Kevin, there is no such thing like an inspection report that says this house is perfect. Just doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And it is probably unrealistic to say, okay, I get a 65-page report with 100 entries in it, that I'm getting all the things that the inspector says would be nice, not just needed and safety, but also all the way down to what would be nice. All of those things done for me before the purchase is completed. But some balance, some happy medium on that will make sure that the property, even if it's far away, and nowadays we have all these tools, you can do like virtual tours and video tours and walkthroughs and stuff. When I first started, always recommended, and I still feel it's a good recommendation, to get in a plane and just go spend a few $100s and look at it yourself. But the point is, those kind of things, the due diligence component, both on financing, on the inspection, on any kind of history, then the rental reports, if it has been a rental before and is not just becoming a rental out of straight, like ugly duckling in the neighborhood that the turnkey provider bought, renovated, and then sells to you. So all those kind of pieces of data. And what is happening now is, and there are more and more organizations that use AI to gather this specific data from this huge mountain of publicly available information, to also include things like economic viability, crime rates, comparative rental performance, and so forth and so forth. So I'm just rattling down a whole bunch of due diligence things to ultimately say, okay, which one of the properties that are on the table for sale right now, taking all the numbers and all the information into consideration, always looking for positive cash flow from day one, is ultimately the best one in this moment, in this couple of weeks period that I can get and want to buy. And how to do this is basically what we're going through. And I always say part of the reason why our mentoring program is 12 months, because assuming the money is there, we can typically do this 2 or 3 times in 12 to 15 months. And after I've done something 2 or 3 times, you have seen the general way of how it goes. Yes, even for me, 15 years, 20 years in, there are still cases where I say I haven't seen that before.
Right.
But the general stuff is there and you know what to look for. Yeah, and then that's, the thing now with the turnkey providers, I want to maybe plant a little bit of a seed that goes slightly more meta perspective. I teach our clients, number one, you want to become an owner of a business empire that is there for you to build and have your investments in. There could be existing investments, but especially for real estate. So if we were to say Pine Financial Group Empire, and that is the LLC or the company that we build for real estate investing. Now, with that comes then throughout this 1-year program to develop the mindset of a business owner, and not quite in the traditional sense, but in a somewhat translated sense, everything and everybody you need. In my book, the way I teach it, is like an employee for a business that you form. You employ a bank, you employ maybe a DSCR lender, you employ an inspector, you employ property management, you employ handyman. You basically, if you imagine you are sitting like the hub in the middle of a bespoke wheel, and all these different spokes are the different employees. And when you come back to your question about how do I stay safe? Well, you take the offer. Now, in my case, I get the offers directly from the turnkey provider. So we don't need agents. We don't need to pay agent fees or any of that. But still, we do due diligence on the property and then decide which one we get. And we basically have now purchased something and employ the turnkey provider's property management part. And if they don't live up to their promises, and we can dive a little deeper why it might be beneficial to start there. If they don't live up to what they promised, you do like any other business owner, you fire them and get another one.
Yeah. I think I'm going to add 2, and I just want to get your opinion on this, Axel. One is when you're looking at a provider, consider Googling that provider and maybe putting the word reviews or complaints or something after and see what the Google machine tells you. 1. And 2, I don't want to tell the whole story here, but I did get hurt on it. It wasn't a significant loss dollar-wise, but it was a significant loss as a % of the investment on a turnkey deal in Memphis. Now, luckily for me, I had a portfolio out there. There was 8 properties, 8 single-family detached homes in this little small portfolio. So one bad one wasn't such a big deal because I had 7 others that were performing pretty well. But that one kind of sucked a little bit. So my other point here that I wanted to make and see what you think is multiple homes in a specific area if you're committed to investing outside your backyard so that you have a little bit of economies of scale. So for this one that I had a challenge on, at least I had contractors and property management and people that are there that could help me because I have other properties that they're also working on. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, for one, what you just described, I call that in my program clustering or building clusters. Right. So instead of being all over the place and having a single property here and there, I'm a big fan like you to build clusters. But there's also a little bit of a component when we talk about, are we looking at a client, or in your case, a client as well as a single like business owner who has that LLC for the purpose of investing? Or are we looking more like what I do? We look at it through the lens of a community. So not only do I recommend to cluster, but when we're talking back to the turnkey provider, obviously, if I start and I buy 2 myself, just to test them out before I even let that turnkey provider sell to any of my clients. So now 3 months later, first client buys 1. 5 months later, 2 other clients buy a few. Here comes the thing that is oftentimes forgotten. I basically bring, both for my own investment plus for my clients, these deals to the turnkey provider. So now the dynamic is whether something doesn't work for me with my 2 or any of the other ones, and I have turnkey providers where our clients have like 15 or 18 or 20 properties in that cluster area with that one turnkey provider. When they come to me and say, hey, Axel, I don't know, but they don't communicate, or I don't know why this thing needs to be this expensive. Is this real? Can this be? Right? Keeping in mind that they may be 1,000 or 2,000 miles away, I can pick up the phone and say, okay, let me talk to the owner. And just ask the simple question, dear Mr. or Mrs. Owner, you want our tribe to leave, or is this a fluke?
That's
Most of the
amazing
time.
advice. So I love what you're saying about the community. So tell us about your community.
Well, it's basically like all the people that went through the mentoring program, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that even when people finish the mentoring program, we offer a 6-month and a 12-month version, but they almost cost the same. So most people go for the 12-month version. But then when they're basically done, and we went through like a couple of investments and the education and all that stuff, I only know of 2 people who left, in the sense of not really doing anything, not continuing to invest. So the community, the tribe, so to speak, is there. We're not thousands of people. We're kind of like a boutique group of people. But still, this building relationships with the provider and building relationships through this community and then being able to pick up the phone is important. To your other point with the Google machine, on the one hand, I agree because it's a good starting point. But I have switched my thinking about it a little bit. And I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but I believe there is a strong psychological component going on. And that is how often, and I'm saying this for myself, I'm not even wanting to necessarily ask you, Kevin, how often do we really make an effort to go and praise in writing by finding a website and finding the opportunity of providing a review when something met our expectations? The one thing I could say, yeah, I do that sometimes when it's off the chart awesome, right? Then I kind of have the feeling, yeah, they deserve to know about it, and I give them a positive review. Or when it's off the chart sucks, and I for sure give them a review.
Yeah.
Right. But the middle part where everything is as expected, we don't do that. And that is really the majority of what happens. So I've seen too many cases where I have long-standing relationships with providers, not just turnkey, all kinds of different ones, that do what they promise, but there's every so often something is going wrong. And anybody who has been any reasonable amount of time in business knows stuff goes wrong. Now imagine every time that happens, you get a negative review and somebody goes randomly to the Google machine. It looks like 90% of what this organization does is all bad. Right. And so it's a little bit of a cautionary tale is, yes, you can start there. And if you're lucky enough to find somebody who's 20 years in business and has no negative reviews, which I'm challenging if that's really possible. But if you find that, then good for you. I just want to make people aware that we have gotten to a point to complain about every little thing. Before we came on, and I don't want to go too deep, but one of my tribe members called me and said, I wanted to tell you my sale went through, we're closed, it's all good, but I almost had a heart attack. I'm like, what happened? She says, the buyer was concerned that I might not pay the last water bill on a little duplex, which would have been anywhere between 40 and 50 bucks, and was almost not willing to sign at closing. Right. And you're saying, what the heck, right? Like, how can $150,000 deal be held up by $40? Right. So, and like I said, I don't want to go any deeper, but this is the kind of stuff, right? And then those people that say, okay, well, I need to be talked into because the seller wasn't clearly covering the bill. Now the title company gets a negative review, right? Because it took 5 hours to finish closing.
Yeah.
I'm just giving
I
a
think
quick
all of that's accurate. I could say that Pine Financial, you would have a hard time finding a negative review. And we're almost 17 years in business. So I think it is possible. It's just how you handle it when there is a problem. So I think I'm not disagreeing with you, Axel. I'm just saying maybe for the listener, it's a good place to start.
Yeah,
and then there might
agreed.
be some red flags. If you see a red flag, then dig into it a little bit more.
Right. I agree with you. And I don't think there are any that I'm aware of negative reviews, but it has a little bit to do with what we do and how much we do. I gave one.
Oh, and I'm not saying this isn't about you at all. I'm just saying in general, if someone's looking at
Yeah.
turnkey, just.
Yeah, I hear you, but let me put this in perspective a little bit. This one turnkey provider, for example, that we're working with in Ohio, at the peak of the market had 1,000 doors, almost all single family, which means you have at the minimum 1,000 tenants, and had about 350-ish or so investors, right? When you get to a certain scale, especially when it's not just people like you and I and people that work in investing and we're basically servicing them, but there is like third party, so to speak, then it gets much, much harder. I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying it's a little different when you are relatively narrow focused to keep that focus clean, that when you're dealing with tenants who complain just because, you know, the leaf blower didn't do a good job when the landscapers came by or stuff like that. I mean, there's the most trivial stuff that people write a negative review for. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you're starting to deal with consumers, that changes everything. So I don't know any property management companies that don't have a negative review. I would definitely agree with that.
Which is part of, if you think about it, we started this about, you know, how do I avoid to not get burned or get burned by a turnkey provider? Well, they're finding, renovating, selling, and managing, right? So, and all across those different parts, there's a chance that they get negative reviews. And again, I want to reiterate, I totally agree with you, Kevin. It's a good point to start when you also have the wherewithal to say, if I see a lot of reviews that are maybe like 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5 stars or something like that, ask yourself a little bit or read them. Don't just go by the overall score, and look a little bit of what are people actually complaining about. Right? It's a huge difference if somebody says, okay, I was at the closing table and then it turns out that the house or the title didn't even belong to the seller. Right? That's obviously a massive thing
100%.
versus, you know, the buyer wasn't sure if they wanted to, if the $40 water bill was covered.
Yeah.
You know, and anything in between.
Totally correct. I agree. I always read the reviews, and if it's from, you know, let me tell you a story real quick that I think might, it definitely relates to what we're talking about here, Axel. I was researching heavily how to make a book become a bestseller. So I've authored 2 books. And so as I was learning about how to get people interested in buying your material, many experts believe that a negative review is positive to selling a book, for example. But what you want to do is have a negative review with some ridiculous comment like that nobody would take seriously, right? Because they're going to go, the person that's looking at the reviews go right to the negative. They don't read the positive reviews, to your point. They go right to the negative. So a strategy that I learned, I did not do this, by the way, but was to have someone do a negative review and just say something really stupid. So not all negative reviews are bad. I agree. You should read them. And if they're from tenants, it's impossible to make them happy in many cases. So it's going to be negative review. But if you're seeing, hey, they stole my money, they didn't return my earnest money, or, you know, they lied about the neighborhood or something like that, that impacts a real estate investor, those are the ones I'd be focusing on.
Yeah, I unintentionally, now that you educated me on that, I started on Amazon with the sale of my book, and the first review was a 3 out of 5 points or stars or whatever. And I looked at it, obviously devastated, and it said, I can't believe that somebody would ever design a cover like that.
Yeah, that's exactly perfect. That's the perfect review for you.
Right. And so my wife said, just let it go. You will not ever make everybody happy.
No, if you got 100 5 stars and you have 1 3 star and that was the comment, that person that's looking is going to buy the book, right? So that's good job on that review.
Well, I didn't even know that would be helpful, but thank you.
You're welcome. This episode is brought to you by Pine Financial Group. Pine Financial is a private lender specializing in short-term rehab lending to real estate investors. Got a property that needs some love? We can help. We are able to offer funding solutions because we raise private money from individual investors. With more than 15 years of experience, Pine offers passive investors an alternative that provides stability, consistency, and security to your portfolio. If you like real estate but want to avoid the ups and downs and effort, a Pine mortgage fund could be a perfect fit for you. Accredited investors will experience an 8% preferred return and profit sharing. Diversify your portfolio out of Wall Street and into Main Street with a Pine Financial Group mortgage fund. Get more information at pinefinancialgroup.com. That's pinefinancialgroup.com. Let's get into your podcast. So I was on the podcast. I know it's been around a long time. You have a ton of episodes. You do a great job with it. So tell us what it is. And I'm very curious, actually, like, how did you get started? What made you start the podcast? And maybe a little bit about the benefits you're getting from it.
Okay. Well, the show is called the Ideal Investor Show. The point about it is, on the one, to educate about residential real estate investing, but also in the context of building something for early retirement. The goal for me has always been to, maybe through podcasts, reach a little bit younger audience compared to I typically have as clients. And how it started was not as deliberate as it may sound, because somebody had told me that I'm supposedly, I still don't really know if I believe it, but I'm supposedly pretty good at expressing myself and complex topics in a relatively easy to understand way. And that would be really good to use and utilize as a guest on podcasts. So I hired a VA and basically asked her, get me on podcasts. And she started doing that. It was great. I really loved it. I got better in expressing what we're doing. But then she came about 6 months in and she said, we have quite a few where we get rejected because we cannot offer the opportunity for people to come on our podcast since we don't have one. And then I did a little research and found out it's really not that hard to start one. Now, anybody listening to us, don't look at the first 50 episodes. They're just all completely horrible. And, it looks like I swallowed a stick or something like that and couldn't get my words out and what have you. But the point was, when she said that and I found out it's really not that hard, we started the show. And my thinking, like I mentioned earlier, was, okay, maybe this is also an opportunity for all the people who consume education, information, and so forth on their hand and on their cell phone, mobile. I have one, I'm using it, but not if I see my daughter, for example, and I see what I'm doing, I feel like a complete moron, with my phone. But I was always conscious to say, and probably the future generations, that I would love to get into real estate investing way earlier than I started. They consume it that way, and that was part of the thing. And it has turned out, and I mean, you're yourself an example, that nowadays we have a lot of these where we basically swap episodes with each other. And and that's, what, 450 episodes ago or so, that's when that happened.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Over 450 episodes. And I've got to assume, Axel, that you've met some really cool people.
Yes.
Anything stand out to you as far as like guests on your show and value you received from a guest?
Well, for example, I started talking about when, I got the impression, and I don't know if you ever run into this, that when you keep talking about, like in our case, real estate, for me, I was wondering, okay, is the audience ever going to get tired? And how can I get across that I'm absolutely for diversification, but still within the value asset frame? And so I said to Nadine, who is my assistant still after all these years, let's look for some guests that are more in a diversified way. And one of the coolest guests I can remember was the former CEO of a gold mining company. And he came on as a guest because he was transitioning into offering gold in basically investable gold bars rather than being still involved in the mining. But he had awesome stories. He was one of those, like the combination of somebody you could imagine in crawling down into the mine, but then coming out, putting on a suit and being the CEO. So that was a super impressive. And I couldn't believe that somebody like that would come on my show, right? And there's a little bit of an evolution. I don't know if you saw, there was this report published, the top 100 podcasts for, I think it's investing or something like that. So we worked our way over the years now up to number 31.
Nice.
So we're at least almost in the top third of the top 100. Yeah, so that was a super impressive guest. And then the thing, without being too specific on a person, is what I learned and wasn't really aware, and it is still the case, is all the variations that people come up with. you know, like converting a campground into a tiny home village is one, or making an RV park an investable real estate play, right? Or buying mobile park trailers, the oldest ones you can get rid of them, buy new ones and rent them out as a real estate play. You know, and then I found this crazy guy who does private lending with some kind of pine company.
He was a fantastic guest. You should definitely check out that episode.
Yeah.
All right, Axel, we're kind of coming to the end here. I want to hear more about the Ideal Wealth Grower, and then I'm going to go through my notes here, what I took as we went through our conversation, and then finish up with the last piece of advice and, of course, contact information. So quickly, tell us about Ideal Wealth Grower.
Yeah, Ideal Wealth Grower is basically two abbreviations that surround a goal. So the goal is wealth. Ideal stands for income, depreciation, equity, appreciation, and leverage. Basically, the 5 things that we do when we invest in real estate. And I'm still believing pretty much the only ones in this, you know, compared to any other assets you can invest in. And then grower is basically, we mentioned the mentoring program, and the educational component is basically my model that I developed as an expansion from the pretty common business coaching model called Grow with John Whitmore. He wrote a book called Performance Coaching, and I read that and felt I wanted to expand it. So that stands for, we start out at the beginning, and then in every other conversation, what is your goal and what is your vision? That's the G. Then what's your current reality? Then what are the obstacles and opportunities that you're facing to reach your goal and vision? What are the actions that you will take? This is a little bit of a stretch how that became a W. Then if you imagine you went through this and now 2 weeks later or so we have the next conversation, my first thing would be to say, hey, Kevin, what was the experience when you took those actions that you committed to? And then the last thing in that is, okay, now that you took these actions, what were the results? Let's say, for example, you wanted to see, do I rather want to invest in Texas, in Idaho, and Ohio, right? So what were the results? And then the last question in that context, which closes it to make it a cycle from session to session, is how do these results, if at all, impact your goal and your vision? Right? And so, you know, I'm also practicing this in a sense to teach my brand new business owners in most cases to also approach everything that they do in that way, because it's a really pretty comprehensive way of addressing and looking at everything.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you describe how you came up with the title Ideal Wealth Grower, it makes me think of how organized you are. It feels very much like you have a strong system in place. Not all coaching and communities, you call them tribe, I love that term. Not all of those out there is this thought through. So you clearly have made this a priority in your career and your investing. And I know you have a pretty large community and you're all very supportive of each other. That's one of the notes I took down that I'll go through in just a minute. So Ideal Wealth Grower, I'm assuming there's a website or something?
Yeah, that's the website in .com, or you can go to Amazon and get the book with that title and the horrible, you know, design.
Go check out the review, guys. 3-star review, and then buy the book. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to go through my notes here. So we started out just kind of catching up. I wanted to hear about your military experience and how you got into that and then into real estate. And we talked about college and how sometimes college and real life are not the same. And you experienced that firsthand, working and the day going to college at night. And then we talked about, is it good? And you said it is good depending on what you want out of it. So is it, if you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, those are 2 examples that I gave, not you, but you definitely need to go to college, right? So that makes a lot of sense. If you are committed to going into entrepreneur or real estate, you may not need college. Maybe the debt might hurt you, but you definitely slows you down. You said 7 years as a real estate investor compared to 7 years of college, who's going to be ahead? So I really like that. Time is finite. We talked about time a couple of times. Location in real estate is vital, and consider turnkey providers to help build well-located portfolio. And we talked about how do we stay safe? Due diligence is key. You want to make sure that you understand the numbers, the inspections on the inspection reports on the property with recommendations on what to do to get those right. Crime rates, that was huge because that's one I missed on my example in Memphis. So do your due diligence. We talked a lot about the Google machine. I like this, and I got to tell you, Axel, every single guest that I've had on, I think without exception, every single one have told me how important people are in their business. And you went a step further saying that you treat them as employees. So you even went to your subcontractors, your contractors, your banks, your accountants, all of those are treated as employees. So people super vital in your success. And you furthered that with your community and how the tribe helps you stay safe with turnkey providers. Obviously, clustering is a smart move, but having a good community is even stronger. That's what it sounded like as you were describing it to me. And then the benefits of a podcast, main benefit to you, and the reason you started was to get on other podcasts like the Real Estate Educators podcast. It does help because you're swapping. So if you're out there looking to start a podcast, I would encourage it. People want to hear from you. And there is some benefit. We got to know each other, Axel, and who knows? We're going to set up a call about doing some business together. I don't know if it's going to work. We got to see, right? But it's something that maybe because of the podcast, we end up doing some deals together. So that's fantastic. How did I do on my notes?
You did awesome. Very impressed. The one thing I might add to the last part is for the podcasting stuff, don't underestimate the value of the relationships that occur, because it's not just this time that we spend together to record. There's a team that makes sure that we ultimately have good pictures and that do the editing and so forth and so forth. So the connection is lasting a little while. But what I'm getting at is, do I have business relationships with I don't know, several hundred people that I interviewed? No.
Right.
I do have some. But here comes one of the important things for anybody contemplating is, whatever your specialty or your thing is, just like yours, Kevin, or mine, you get approached by people who approach you because they respect you as a knowledgeable person. And they ask in a way an open-ended question, can you help me with fill in the blanks? And I would say it is much more likely that my answer is not really, but I know someone. And that aspect of community in a broader sense, where I know, and we have, as you figured out, we have spreadsheets for everything, including all the people we interviewed and all the podcasts I ever was on. So that kind of bigger scale community, where if somebody were to do exactly the thing that Pine Financial Group is the perfect solution, I would send them to you. Right. And that aspect is oftentimes not necessarily seen. Yes, we have our core, but I can now, because of the podcast, send people that need a solution for something to almost anything related to real estate and real estate investing, and even some things beyond that.
Yeah, I could not agree more. There's a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Most business owners or salespeople have read that book. In there, they talk about the word that I can never pronounce, reciprocity or whatever that.
Reciprocity, yes.
Reciprocity. Whatever the concept, if you help people and you're adding value to their lives, they're going to feel the need to, or the want, the desire to help you, right? And that's just human nature. So if you're adding value as you're describing, it does come back, even if you're not intending to do that, and if you're not asking for it, just the fact that you want to help somebody else builds that. So it's just a natural.
Exactly. And so if you don't like that complicated work, you can just say what goes around comes around.
Well, it does, yeah. For some reason, that word is so hard for me to say. Like I feel like I need to study that word. Like,
yeah.
Well,
it took
okay,
me
so
like six years to say Massachusetts,
Massachusetts, yeah. I can imagine. So, all right, great. Let's get your contact information. I know you have a newsletter that you put out there, and then I want you to close out, Axel, with any final piece of advice for maybe someone who's wanting to educate other investors like you are, or a beginning real estate investor wanting to get started.
Right. Well, Idea Wealth Grower, I think we said it a whole bunch of times. So if you put that into, like, you call it the Google machine, you put it in Amazon, you put a .com behind it, and you find me and you can book a call. The piece of advice is not really so much a advice than a realization. And we touched on it. You have probably touched on it many times. people seem to think in general that for whatever they actually get involved with, they need to be ready for. And I would really suggest for people, especially when it comes to investing and investing in value assets like real estate, don't wait until you feel that you're ready for it. Start today. This goes back to this old saying, you know, like when you ask a really experienced real estate investor, when was the best time to invest? They will all say 20, 30, 40 years ago. Second best time is today. Well, you can turn time back, but anybody listening to us, no matter what age, start today. That's really the message that I want to get across. Whether you feel you're ready or not, the only way you ever really get ready and really get free financially is to start.
Love it. I 100% agree with you. All right, Axel, thank you so much for giving us almost an hour, about 50 minutes of your time here today. I know you're super busy. I know you like doing this too. So, but you're busy, and we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience with our audience. So thank you for that. For the listener, there's lots of podcast choices out there. Axel's got one. And you chose to check out the Real Estate Educators podcast. And I so appreciate you. If you enjoyed the episode as much as I did, give us a 5-star review, share it with a friend. And with that, I hope you make this day a great one. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did, please be sure to follow and leave us a review. Oh yeah, and tell a friend.